mentioned, the growing pains, and I mentioned about things not going too well. I still think they put on a terrific product. But there's other things that I feel more and more these days are coming to light, especially around, the stadiums and the arenas that they're using and the amount of empty seats and all of that kind of stuff. It's almost like it's being documented by everyone that goes to AEW show now, that this area is tapered off and this area is tapered off. And I think, it's hard times. Just, there's a cost of living crisis. People might just not be able to afford to go to wrestling shows, but obviously the internet does what it does and they read into it in a different way. And, traditionally we would look at who's holding the world title, the big title of the company, and say, is this guy a draw? Put the title on him. And, fans would come out in their droves to come and see this particular person. And I do not want anyone to take this as I'm blaming MJF, because I think MJF is the best world champion that they've had in 4 years. Like, he's the best world champion this company has had. But is there an element of blame, or that something like this needs to sit on MJF? Like, what are we doing wrong here? Maybe as a company presenting him, or is he to blame that we can't sell more tickets, should I say? Where do you think this lies? And if you are of that belief, do you think we need a new world champion to come in and maybe freshen things up?
I think it's a fair question. I don't think that he's been a bad world champion, of course. I've enjoyed most of his run. But I think the thing about MJF is a lot of his appeal is he's selling pay-per-views, because a lot of his matches are the pay-per-view matches. Like, he's building up to get to the pay-per-view. And so for weekly television, there's not as much of an appeal to come and see him. Like Title Tuesday, he didn't have a match on that card. Yeah, he had the promo segment, but also that was probably the most talked about segment in a negative way. And I feel like all of this is kind of uncharted territory for AEW, because this is the first time we've seen like people paying attention to stuff like the ticket sales and empty seats, because this wasn't a thing before. Because the thing about AEW that used to be so exciting was the live crowd, and you would watch the shows and you would just see how loud the crowd was, how invested the crowd was, and that's changed. You've also seen stuff like, take for example the criticism of the women's division. That used to be a thing that you would just see online. Now you're seeing signs at the shows. And so I'm just like, this is all kind of uncharted. Like, but it's also, you look at you're doing 2 shows a week now. You're doing a show on Saturday, and you're doing a show on Wednesday, and you're doing more pay-per-views than you've ever done. It's tough, because in some ways I feel like you're asking a lot of your audience. Because if you're assuming that your audience is like me, that watches everything, not watch everything, but watch as much as I can. If you're a WWE fan and you're an AEW fan and you're an Impact fan, there's a lot of tickets to be buying. And like I said, we're talking about 2 shows a week. We're talking about 5 hours of wrestling a week, on top of Ring of Honor, on top of pay-per-views, on top of Ring of Honor pay-per-views. It's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's totally MJF, but I do think it's a fair question to ask, because he is the top guy. And of course, as always, whoever's your top guy at a time when ratings are an issue or ticket sales are an issue, you're going to look at this guy. And I think he's been a good champion, but I just think it's the weekly stuff that is within question, because I enjoy like the long promos. Like, I think some people are like, these long promos are just not for me. I enjoy it, but I also recognize that when they were getting the most out of him was when the storyline stuff with Adam was hitting. Because, for example, when Max and Adam were on Collision, that Collision did really well. And that was off his back. So it's like he can draw ratings when people are invested in the story. But I don't know if it's just Max. If it's just Max coming out doing the Max stick where he does the long back and forths and he like does all the catchphrases, I don't think that's as much of an appeal for people. But I think when you give people the storyline, or when you give people the match and stuff, people are in. But this guy is clearly over as hell. He's like one of the most over wrestlers in the company.
Definitely, yeah. Yeah, we'll see. Like I think that it's unfair to solely put it on him, but like I said, however, you can't traditionally in pro wrestling that is what you would do. If this was the 80s or whatever, you would say this guy's not drawing, people aren't coming and buying tickets, and you're looking at who's next in line for the world title, and we got Full Gear coming up, and next in line for a title shot is Switchblade Jay White. I don't know what you think about this title reign, how much longer it should last, or are you ready for Jay White to maybe pinch it at Full Gear?
As a Jay White fan, I want Jay White to win, but that's also as I am a big New Japan fan. But I also recognize like most mainstream fans are not New Japan fans. They're
Yeah,
not Jay White fans, and so yeah, I do think that Jay White can take this belt off of him and can have a good run with it. But I also recognize if you want a champion that can hold that belt and like bring in the recognition that Max does, because Max got built up to this point over 4 years. I can understand why it might be too soon for Jay White, but my personal opinion, I want Jay to win.
yeah. I likewise. I think rightly, like you said, 4 years, and that's introducing MJF to a wider crowd. Obviously,
Mm-hmm.
he's been doing his thing, but Switchblade Jay White, people know who Jay White is, like
Yes.
to a certain degree, especially the AEW crowd. Like, you'll know who Jay White is, and I feel like the way he was treated, like coming into AEW, was, I would say, very poor. Like, I think they should have really made a big deal, but I guess they had him on TV or at Forbidden Door the year before with the IWGP title. But yeah, they just didn't bring him in with the same energy this year. But he's found his way now, especially with Bullet Club Gold by his side. I'm ready for it, and I would want to see if there's a turn around in the things like ticket sales and things of that nature. With
Yeah.
a new champion.
Yeah. I mean, the thing you got to give Max a little bit of credit on, and I won't say a little bit credit. You have to give him credit. Is that when you look at like the run into Grand Slam and how he was doing all the press, and you saw how ticket sales went up when he was going around and helping and like really putting feet to pavement. That's what your champion's supposed to do.
Yeah.
And and that's the thing that I'm not sure. Like if you put Jay White in that same situation, and put him in on a mainstream outlet, do you get the same response? I'm not sure yet. Now, of course, that's on Jay White to prove us wrong on that. Do I think that he's a charismatic guy and he's a guy that can sell your show? Yes, but I also think at this point, like Max has been groomed to this point for 4 years, and so he was better at it. He's better at doing that in front of the U.S. audience than Jay White would be.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned a good point there. It's more than at this point. It's more than just being a great champion on TV. You need to go out and represent the company as well, which is, like you said, would be uncharted territory, I guess, somewhat for Jay White. It'll be interesting to see. Just one last thing on this topic, like with the increased amount of the pay-per-views that they're bringing in, and what they are charging for pay-per-views. I mean, last thing I saw is usually around the $50 mark. Am I right saying that?
Yeah.
For pay-per-views? Yeah. How do you think, are they going to have to drop the price if they're gonna have monthly pay-per-views? Like, how do you think they're best gonna have to manage that situation before they see pay-per-view buys, dip as well?
I think they've got to figure out their streaming situation. I think that that's going to help them, not just with the weekly show, but especially with the pay-per-views. They've got to figure out what they're going to do with like a streaming platform, because the fact that WWE has Peacock and you can just watch all the pay-per-views on Peacock. I mean, even I don't know, like New Japan World, you just pay whatever the $9.99 and you can watch all of their shows. I mean,
Yeah.
Impact Plus is a thing. All these other companies have a streaming service. I think at this point, AEW is going to have to figure that out. If they're going to give us more content, they're going to have to figure out a home for all of it.